Everybody should watch again, Softball Strength Academy. I do. How did you? I want to touch on this personally. How did you feel going into? Because you mentioned last week you felt as good as you've ever felt going into the postseason. How did you feel mentally hitting? How did you feel physically? Because not to take away from your defense, you were a great defender, but hitting was your bread and butter. I
Mhm.
think you'd collaborate on that opinion. How did you feel both physically and mentally going into the postseason on the offensive side?
Yeah, you know what? I wasn't nervous at the plate, and usually playoffs came with like a little added nerves, and so I think that's that veteran feel where it's like, okay, this is
Mhm.
just like every other game. And if you got out, it wasn't too big of a deal. And to be honest, I really wasn't seeing the ball well, but I was finding ways to still get some hits here and there, and I was still finding ways to be productive. And I had gotten hurt actually in the SEC tournament at a play at first base. A girl slid into my arm, and I landed on my arm.
Mm.
So for the rest of the playoffs, I couldn't finish my swing. And so I think whether that affected my swing or not, it was definitely in the back of my head that I was like, okay, is this going to affect it? Is this going to affect it? So it was what it was. I think the other thing of it too is you have so many people above and below you in the lineup. You have so many people who are supporting you. There was never this pressure where it's like, okay, I'm the only hitter that can get the job done. That I never, obviously I wanted to get the job done, but there was never that pressure on that team. We all shared so much of the load of production that, you know, it made it fun to be a part of that lineup, obviously. But even when you didn't feel like you had to be at your best all the time as far as seeing the ball this big and
Mhm.
having your best at bats ever. It was, okay, I'm not seeing the ball. I can poke a single right here. I can still get the job done and not feel like I had to hit a home run, you know.
Yeah, and you were still batting in the number 2 spot at that time.
I don't remember actually. I cycled 2 to 6, I think, that whole year.
How did not being able to finish your swing affect you, if at all?
I I'm not sure. I think it was one of those things where you'd be in a bat, you take a swing, and then I wouldn't feel it till I was running down the first baseline where I was like, oh. So it was really more in my preparation where I had this like really great drill series set up that I was preparing before practices and games. That completely changed. And to be honest, leading into the World Series, I only trained top hand. And then all of a sudden I got into the World Series. I had one of my biggest hits in the first game of the World Series. And I was like, that's it. That
Yeah,
works. I'm
yeah,
going to continue training top hand.
yeah. How did you feel going into the World Series as a team?
Mm-hmm.
Because you guys kind of were at this point, were on a roll. Was the confidence peaking? Did you look across from you and realize who you were playing and how you had to play your best game? What was your mindset going into that World Series and in the beginning of the World Series?
It's one of those things where it's almost hard not to get flashbacks from what happened the year before. So like, you know, we got run rolled by Florida in a doubleheader the year before to get kicked out.
Mhm.
Freshman year, we lose on a walk-off grand slam. Like we had all these, we didn't have the best endings at the World Series, and yet we felt like we were close, but maybe we weren't as close as we thought. And it was actually Olivia Gibson, who was a senior. We had 6 seniors that year. She was the only one that didn't play. And what's crazy is you talk in post-game interviews and people are like, well, why'd you guys win it this year and not other years? And her name gets brought up more times than not. But I remember we're standing there and she's like, you know, I was asking her how she's feeling. She's like, I feel like we're here to pick up what is rightfully ours, like what we've paid for. And she referenced that story of like, you know, winning a national championship is expensive and you can't pay for it all at once. She's like, we've already paid for it. We've paid for it so many times over. She goes, that's already ours. We're just here to pick it up. And it was this very calming, odd sense of like, not invincibility, but almost like not this false sense of invincibility, but just like, okay, you're right. Like, here we go. And when you
Okay,
can eradicate doubt like that, it's a lot of fun.
that's a lot of confidence.
It was
It's a good way to
that
look at things.
that was probably the most confident I think most confident team I've ever been a part of. So much so that like we were not the favorite in some games, but we were like we weren't mad by it. We were like confused. We are like, what are they seeing that we don't? Like we couldn't not see that we were the best team in the country, which is how it's supposed to be. 5 months later, I would go back and I was like, oh my gosh, they're shortstop, they're this, like like they had better this, but like at the time, I don't know, you're just so blinded by it.
And I mean, you had to have that mindset going into that series against Oklahoma.
Uh,
Final few games.
yes, and you know, we really, again, thank goodness, like social media is not what it was right now, but you hear little murmurings, little this, you hear in an interview like who they picked to win it. Not a single reporter picked us to win it. And again, we weren't mad or distracted by it. We were just confused. I was like I was genuinely confused how they thought Oklahoma was the better team. Again, I go back and watch videos, and I'm like, holy cow! Like, they were stacked.
Mhm.
But we just saw each other in such a light. It was, talk about like a different shade of glasses you see your team through. But yeah, I pictured us as giants, and everyone else was kind of just along for the ride. We were just gonna walk through everything.
Yeah, that's where, and you know what? That's where the data, I think, and the analytics still have not been able to figure out that gray area. Baseball and softball, there is a gray area, black and white certainly, and there's a lot of value to data and analytics, but there's also that gray area too. And admittedly, so you just said it, Oklahoma was the better team, and you guys still ended up pulling out the victory. So I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I think there is that gray area there.
There has to be, right?
Your
Like,
stories are proving it.
why would you actually play the game if you're right? If you're only going to look at this team should beat this team, then there is obviously something in the game that matters. There's obviously something about adrenaline and passion and that momentum that matters, you know, and scraping and clawing. And because even though like it is a team sport, it's a very spotlight sport. So hitter versus pitcher, like you can get these individual moments, one-on-one moments in a game, but I mean, talk about how good it feels like to be in a one-on-one moment and have 19 people in the dugout, like locked in with you on every pitch.
Yeah.
It's empowering.